special edition of Education Matters. In this episode, we'll be talking about the New Jersey Economic and Fiscal Policy Workgroup. Also talking about the path to progress, their recommendations. So we'll be focusing on some of the recommendations in terms of regionalization, special education, and others. With me to the far left is Senator Steve Oroho from Sussex County, co-chair of the workforce group, and Senate President Steve Sweeney to my immediate left. Let's talk about, with our membership, when you bring up the word regionalization, I know that was brought up there. What was the recommendations to look at that, Senate President?
Well, the recommendations that we were given, and it was actually a former Education Commissioner, Lucille Davey, who sat on the panel, recommended that we do away with the K-4s, 6s, and 8s, and we make all schools K-12, or pre-K-12 now. And one, it would guarantee the curriculum would be coordinated with the high school where you're sending the kids. There would be savings, but we actually think we can improve education even further by making sure that all the kids, and I know some regional districts coordinate with their regional high school, but they all don't. So one was improving, improving communications between the sending districts to the regionals. And there's just a whole bunch of savings that go along with it. You can save money in your transportation costs. Again, you can improve across the board, we think, education, and we could eliminate school districts. You could go from 600 school districts to 320. Now that's like, oh my God, and maybe over here that works, but don't do it in my backyard. Well, what we found out when we start looking at small school districts, I'll give you a comparison. When we looked at small towns, which was part of this discussion, because everyone says, get rid of the towns, they're too small. We found out small towns were very, very efficient financially. So that was a recommendation, didn't make the final report. But with schools, we found out was small school districts, 500 kids and less, spend 17% more than the highest spending districts in the state of New Jersey. So is that being fair to the taxpayer too? So, it comes down to is ensuring high quality schools, but making them the most efficient they can be possibly too. And we hear school districts, well, we did this and we did that and we did this. Yeah, but you're spending 17% more than the Newarks of the world or the Jersey Cities of the world, which tells me you're not being efficient, because there's a lot of challenges that go into certain schools. So you might think you're being efficient, but we think there's a better way of doing it. And look, Maryland went to countywide government and countywide schools years ago. We think this is the first step that needs to be addressed. And in the path to progress, they also recommend 2 countywide school systems. And I can tell you, I represent Salem County. That has 67,000 people in the whole county, and they have 5 high schools. So when you start looking at it and you really start drilling down, can we do things better? We always can. And that's what the game plan was to look at.
No, in your district, you have a lot of the small
We do, and we will
districts, and
yep.
how do you?
And we also have some K to 12, and right, the whole issue of there wasn't, and you won't find the idea of cost savings in there. The issue is how do we bend the cost curve, into the future. But that recommendation, and it was the regionalization of the K to 12, was purely on an educational delivery service, right? Now we do expect that there's going to be more efficiencies, that way. But I know there's been some people say, oh, you're going to close all schools and stuff. No, there was no recommendation. Now, if there's enrollment declines in the future, and that's a recommendation of the local school district, that's a different story. But that recommendation wasn't from here. So how do you get a better delivery and coordination for and I really have to give the School Board Association a shout out, because you had a report to come out about the impediments to regionalization. The committee talked about them very much. These are things, and that's why it wasn't one of the reasons of let's consolidate, because you ram something together and all of a sudden you're losing federal money, or you've got a debt issue, or you've got a school representation issue. So we recognize that we have to do this intelligently, and obviously they're all going to the same high school. So,
can I just jump in with him? Steve just put a really important point across. This is not about closing school buildings. Right. Because that's what that's what others will do to fearmonger that
Right.
your child's going to be sent across the county and all this other stuff. You're going to be in the same school building, and the only difference is instead of an administration, there'll be a principal. That's the only difference. And eventually, if you keep losing population, well, that would be a decision
A local
made
decision.
a local decision that was made, and local taxpayers would decide. But and I really agree with Steve, and I should have said this earlier. The School Boards Association, we really appreciate their forward thinking and identifying the problems that they would have with us trying to do this, because it's got to be a partnership. And instead of sitting back and letting something happen, they're willing to have that dialogue with us that, well, if you're going to do this, these are the things you have to have in order to accomplish.
And that's what's going to
Which-
happen too going forward, because
That was my
if
question.
you remember a few years ago, we actually had to pass a law that would allow a school district that was non-contiguous to a municipality to be able to share services. So there's going to be some of those things that, that maybe if the red tape that Senator Sweeney and I had put in with Governor Christie, well, the kind of recommendations would come through that. There's a lot of things that are in the statutes that all of a sudden you said, why are they there? And we got to change them.
So you would look at legislation that might remove some of those
Absolutely.
obstacles.
And there are definitely those impediments. We don't want to do something that's going to all of a sudden make us lose federal funding. New Jersey doesn't get enough federal funding. That
can all
wouldn't make
agree on
any
that.
sense.
So this is not, this is a little bit more about education and cost savings,
Correct. Yeah.
particularly for the state, and it's probably not going to be forced at this point on districts.
Not forced, but you're getting to a point where, unfortunately, tough decisions have to be made, and if people aren't willing to make them, then maybe they have to be made. New Jersey likes home rule. They love home rule. I'll use a perfect example. My home county is the only county in the state that has countywide ambulance, and it was a fight to put it in place. It's better than what anybody else had. It's cheaper than what anybody else has had. We run half the ambulances, and I still don't have all 4 towns in. I don't have all 24 towns in, because some towns are just like, nope, this is mine. Well, it's about us, and we all need to be in this together, because if we're in it together, we're going to come up with better solutions. New Jersey's an old state, and it has old practices, and really they do things. We need to modernize and move forward and recognize the world has changed. The civil service rules have to change. There's all kinds of things that we haven't changed for 70 and 80 years. Things are required to be updated at some point.
The home rule issue, just if you want, people want home rule, they don't want to pay for it. And what's happened over the years is the state has taken on costs to say, well, let's help reduce property taxes because of the home rule issue, and think of the costs that are at the state level that really are local costs. You got the Social Security costs for active teachers. That's at the state level. You have the post-employment benefits for teachers. That's at the state level. And then you have the pension contribution at the state level. That's over $2 billion of costs that, quite frankly, are at local level, which are local share. So unfortunately, we've made some really bad decisions throughout the years where, quite frankly, the costs associated with a decision should be at the point of the decision. And unfortunately, there's $2 billion of costs that aren't. But that's a great example of people on home rule, they don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
So let's go to, you mentioned the countywide pilot district.
Right.
How would that go about? I saw it was voluntary, but who volunteers it? Is it?
Well, there's
It's a
been
pilot.
Well, up by where Steve lives, Hunterdon and Sussex both have talked about doing it. And again, it would be nice to have one in the northern part of the state, one in the southern part of the state, because just so you realize, around the country, they have countywide school systems. And kids are educated, and they're educated very well. So this isn't something revolutionary, like, oh my God, how dare they plan this? This happens all around the country. It just doesn't happen here, because for a lot of years, people liked what they had. It's just the biggest problem now is they can't afford it anymore. So
I think part of the idea of having the 2 pilots, and hopefully, if you had 2 counties who wanted to, be the pilot program, that one, they see the success, and that they also see that, you know, they're going to get maybe some extra benefits because they went ahead and paved the road for people to see. But like I said, at the same time, you know, whoever wants to do that and say they get some extra benefits, that they were the quote unquote the guinea pigs to get it done, then show the success, and then, you know, others say, hey, wait a minute, if I can save this, or we can do this, or we can provide a better service, or we can do it this way, because they're, like, for example, the district factor groups is going to become an important thing to make sure, once again, that we don't want to lose money, but at the same time, let's make it as efficient as possible.
Which is kind of what happens with regionalization. Sometimes we get 5 districts together, and there's 3 will save money and 2 will not save money, and then countywide, I guess you would have the same situation. Who decides to volunteer the county, though? Is that the freeholder? Is that a referendum?
Well, we're figuring that out right now. We have legislation we're working on to figure it out. This is one area where the governor has publicly said he supports the idea. So you have the legislature in advancing the idea about countywide school district. The governor says he supports the concept too. And look, and realize again too, when you do regionalization, what can come out of that is better product, better service, smaller class sizes, better technology, because you're not wasting money on other things that don't add to the benefit of education. So again, you're taking your dollars. You know, there's nothing wrong if you can improve and reduce taxes at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I just want to get into some other areas of the recommendations. And New Jersey has a great school system. We're always ranked in the top 1 or 2, 3 sometimes.
We have a high cost per student. We like to measure ourselves versus Massachusetts, but at the same time, their cost per student is significantly lower than ours.
You talked about special ed funding, and you talked about that before. And one of the goal of, I think, of our association and all the education groups, and plus the legislature, is to meet the needs of all our students.
Yeah.
So one of the proposals in there was to fully fund special education.
Extraordinary special ed, and it's something, it's near and dear to me personally. I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and so people with disabilities have a special place in my heart. And it always drives me nuts when you hear the school district say, we had 3 families that moved in, there goes our school budget. Well, people shouldn't feel that way. People with disabilities deserve an opportunity to be productive citizens, like my daughter is. My daughter wants to be productive. She works, you know, she has a job, she's got iPhones, you know, she's really got a full life, as full a life as she can live. So people got to look beyond the disability to see the person that's inside and try to help them move forward. And look, we really should pick up all the cost. Extraordinary special ed as a start. I'd like to do all special education, but again, all these other cost drivers are crowding out dollars to do what we want to do that will help everybody. So, you know, if we could take all extraordinary special ed to the state level, and again, I got to give credit to Joe Panaccio, Senator Joe Panaccio, this was his idea, that by doing that, we've given relief. But what you're spending locally, you don't get to spend over here. You have to cut your taxes by that.
And the Senate President has been the biggest advocate for extraordinary special education funding. When we served on that select committee for school funding, and also for the Path to Progress, and you'll find it in both.
Now, it's just not directly with schools, but another kind of the proliferation of pilots. It's something that has occurred, and it has an effect on school funding, property taxes, and there was a recommendation in that area too.
Yeah, well, you know, we're not opposing pilots, number one. We don't oppose pilots at all. But where school districts are being underfunded locally, that's where I do oppose it. If you want to do a pilot and you're not at adequacy funding locally, then you have to give the town, the school district, the percentage that you're getting from that pilot. Whatever the makeup is, if it's 60, you know, school district and, you know, 2020, well, the town doesn't get to keep 100. The town has to give the school district their share. Now, if they're overfunding, like Woodbridge, I know was funding at 116%. They're entitled to keep it because they're overfunding their district.
I should before you pilots are payment in lieu of taxes, and for those people who are listening.
Correct. And let's face it, what the power to do, as the Senate President said, is that entice an employer to come in, or an improvement on something, and quite frankly, the school district is cut out. But one of the first things, what's an employer want? A good workforce. So why cut out the education, system as well? Now there's been a lot of different debate on the pilots programs and whatnot, how it affects the whole school funding formula in the wealth-based issue of whether it's included in the property assessment or the wealth assessment, and it's not at 100% fair value, and quite frankly, in my opinion, it should be. Because then it's more, look, we want a funding formula that's going to be equitable for everybody, right? And it's not that you can't manipulate it. It's something that, quite frankly, this is the formula, this is how it works, it's fair to everybody, and the manipulation is, based upon, data or that you can't manipulate it.
All right, we've been talking about a lot of these issues. I assume that in the Senate, at least, there'll be some legislation proposed. Where are your colleagues in the Assembly? And then I'll ask you where the governor might be on some of these recommendations.
I can't speak for the speaker or the governor. All I can speak for is the Senate, because that's where I represent. And we're going to move forward on things because it has to be done. I would expect that if enough people, and we've been working very hard on this path to progress. We're doing town hall meetings throughout the state, and we're going to continue to really ramp up for people to start paying attention to it. Because when you say nothing can be done here, and I'm just going to give up and leave, I'm old enough to remember this movie called Network, where the announcer opens the window and says, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." We energize the public, and we will get the solutions with the Assembly and the governor, but we need to energize the public. My biggest fear is what I told you earlier. I had a friend of mine at 4:30 in the gym saying to me, as soon as my two kids get out of school, I'm out of here. I don't want to lose those people. It's not good.
Right, I think you see, as far as the governor and the Speaker of the Assembly, I echo my comments from the Senate President. Being in a minority party, he's the main guy. He gets.
But what about
to
the
talk with them.
Republicans?
But on the Republican side, I think you said the Senate President has been very good at talking on a bipartisan basis. When it was that select committee on school funding, which we all didn't agree on certain things. We're trying to get some other things fixed, but you'll see that there's a lot of bipartisan support on a lot of things that we're talking about in the path to progress.
Yeah, it's not Republican or Democrat.
No.
This is if we don't all pull together. First off, the hard things always take both parties to get done, and if we don't all pull together pretty soon, New Jersey is going to become the state where anybody that can leave is going to leave, and that's not a good thing.
Okay, I'd like to thank the two of you for joining me on this special edition of Education Matters. I hope you enjoyed it.